So, quick introduction. So some of you might not know me, though you know some intimate details right now. I've been with the organization for rounding up 11 years. That started with VeriSign, then to Symantec, and obviously now to DigiCert. Enjoying my time here in a bunch of different contexts, so product management and product marketing and part of sales and what have you. I tend to be the face and the voice of outbound communications for the company, especially to customers and to partners and to prospects. Sometimes the sales team hauls me out to go and talk to somebody you're selling to, and that's something I value because I'm really passionate about certain things, and two of them in particular are about your ability to project fundamental trust on the interwebs, and also to secure your environment. And how can we help you do that? But at the same time, how can you maximize your investment in what we do and what's important to us? Not just our products and our tool set, but also how we lead in the industry and what our vision is for ourselves, but also for the industry. So to help you maximize your ability to capitalize on that is something that's very important to me. Our panelists today are experts on that, and as I said before, they're your peers. And we've invited them up here because there's a great degree of trust between us and the organization and them as our customers, but also because they're pretty good at speaking of the topics that we're going to speak from. Now, I mentioned in passing three of my favorite topics, which is vision, leadership, and value. And why I like to often talk about that in the sense of DigiCert, they maximize this, and that's really why they're here, is because they can speak from their standpoints in using our tool set and what we offer. So they're going to share their expertise and perspectives. Now, this isn't going to be what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I fully expect that what they share is something that you can take home. So this will be of value to you. Now, we've got four big topics that are going to wrap around those three things of vision, leadership, and value that we're going to speak about. And it has a lot to do with a lot of our tools, but also what we intend and how we all work within the industry. So the first place I'm going to start up, and we should go from there, is like when you go into a casino, as we did last night at the networking gig, you look at all those games and like, which one am I going to play? If you've never been in a casino in your life, it's kind of overwhelming. Like, how am I going to go lose my money? And knowing what you're going to do, what game you're going to play, what you're going to dip your toes in becomes really important. PKI-based solutions are all over the place. In our tools, there's SSL and TLS, there's PKI-based stuff for devices to do talking to each other. We do code signing, and there's enterprise authentication, all manner of things. Now, our vision is for SSL and PKI is to secure all the devices connecting to the internet. But what's more important is to grasp from our panelists what really comes from their vision. And the first question for the panel is going to be about their near-term priorities. And this is with regards to the usage of SSL and TLS and PKI within your environment. Gerardo, I know you wanted to say something about your priorities in here.
Sure. So we are actually at Nutanix building a full-fledged, what we call secrets management platform. And a big component of that is going to be PKI. Right, so what we're really kind of embarking on is moving away from your traditional kind of enterprise. As you guys all know, there's a number of different SaaS services that people are using, and the endpoints are coming inside the network. They're leaving the network. So there's this zero trust model that we're kind of going after. And in order to establish a zero trust, you really have to have the devices have some type of identity that you can validate to establish the trust at that level, at that fundamental level. And then on top of that, you start to add additional identities for the actual individuals themselves to authenticate them against specific services. So when you start looking at those two layers, you're really going to go from a very small, like PKI certificate base to large numbers. And that's where we really need to kind of look at the PKI services and see how we can actually scale.
Excellent. No, Jerry, I can't help but read body language. You were looking at both displays, and all the panelists, if you feel you want to chime in here, this is an active discussion. And while we can take questions at the end if you want to ask of our panel, you're welcome to chime in. Please, go right ahead.
So Target, like a lot of companies, we've got a big shift from more traditional legacy where you have a lot of static environments to cloud. So whether it's Azure, it's AWS, Google, whatever, or OpenStack. When it comes to provisioning the certs, in the old static environments, manual was maybe okay. So this is going to be a really big year of automation. And as app teams are moving from static environments to these more immutable, Dockerized, whatever it may be, we have to be able to provide a service for those guys to consume. And so there's also kind of been a mind shift as to where responsibility starts and stops between a cert team and an app team. And those app teams really have to take on a lot of the ownership, and we have to make sure that we have a stable service that's there 24 hours a day to provide that for them in a consumable way that works for them. So,
Jeff,
yeah, just big year of automation is.
I want to give you something you probably don't know, but security reports directly to marketing in nearly every company. And Google has decided that in 2018, it's going to mark anything that's not HTTPS as insecure, which means that marketing wants everything to have HTTPS by whenever 72 comes out, their next version. So, I mean, that's where the pressure is coming from. Google says, hey, we're going to mark stuff in Chrome as insecure, and marketing's like, that's going to lose us 47 fake Google SEO points. We need to fix this. And
right. And that's something that we're concerned about. Likewise, obviously, we would love to help fulfill that. But that also puts, I would imagine, puts some pressure on the organization as when marketing says, well, we want this so bad, how then do you keep them in compliance so that they're buying from the solution that you want them to buy or get the best deal on or what have you? Yeah. Any tips or anything on that?
Yeah, I think it's a relatively straightforward process when you're talking about a couple sites. Where we're focused on priority-wise is helping our SaaS customers do this at scale. So, and we have companies coming to us with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of millions of domains that are pointed into them via CNAME. And so managing that key material, excuse me, going out and acquiring it, getting it from the customer, asking them to follow some process is very hard for these end customers. So we're focused on allowing people to kind of tightly couple, not in an engineering sense in a bad way, but from an onboarding perspective. So if you're going to an e-commerce site or marketing automation platform, whatever business you're running, you want to let your customers serve their TLS traffic over their own host name rather than a subdomain of yours. So that's a big focus for us in using DigiCert's high volume issuance APIs to make that happen quickly, and then dealing with a lot of the exception management. So things like CAA, Google Safe Browsing checks, whatever things you may think about on the long tail. That's really where you're going to spend the effort. Getting a certificate initially is relatively straightforward. It's all that stuff that could happen and could go wrong where you need to focus on.
So you brought up CAA. So even though we don't have thousands of customers coming to us, we still have our internal customers. And app teams love them, right? But they want to go 100 miles an hour, and sometimes we're not going 100 miles an hour yet. So one of the things that we're looking at and looking for Digi to help us with is help flush out what CAA looks like. So that we can implement it to kind of use CAA as some guardrails to prevent the eager app engineer from going off and maybe provisioning their own things from our favorite Let's Encrypt type Acme supported protocol provider.
That's actually how Facebook, they have a CAA. You could monitor, if you have a developer account, you can monitor for issuance. They actually developed that because some of their developers were going rogue and getting certificates, so it's good to have some monitoring in place like that.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times, actually I can tell you how many times that I've gone onto a customer site, going with a sales rep or what have you, and whether they're an account or not, we ask the question, so how do you track your certificates? And usually the answer is, there tends to be three answers. One is just an embarrassed laugh. Another one is we don't, or we do and we do a terrible job. Or we track it on a spreadsheet or in our Outlook calendars somewhere, and then somebody leaves and we realize how badly that works. That's when it's within control of IT or InfoSec, what have you. Never mind someone from another organization, engineers or marketing getting involved. This actually leads right into the next question I wanted to ask, so let's tee that up. And this is coming from our standpoint that from the beginning, we've wanted our products to be focused on the customer's experience. You've heard that over and over, especially John just like pounded that one through. And this is particularly to increase simplicity, but at the same time, reduce friction in the management of certificates. Now, panelists, some of you have spoken as to which one how you'd like to take this on. What would be your advice to the audience, and equally to DigiCert, regarding our product and our tool set? What are the things that can make certificate management easier and smoother for you?
Yeah, to steal some of Sarah's thunder from her last things, we're all kind of future evangelists. And
Right.
everybody needs to build automation. My boss has a story where he's like, I'll hire somebody to automate themselves out of a job and then give them another job, right? Like in 2018, that's kind of the goal. That's how we get to killer robots, is really smart people automate away all the jobs. And it can't take 4 hours for somebody to approve a certificate anymore, or even 90 minutes while they're out to grab lunch. So we work hard to automate as much as we can with common sense controls wrapped around it. And on the backside is, if you make your process easy enough, people won't work around the process. And we preach that all the time. Security has to be frictionless, and it has to be invisible as much as possible. Because developers do want to go 100 miles an hour, and the business wants them to go 150 miles an hour. So if they have to wait for you to get back from lunch to approve a certificate, you are now making them miss their sprint deadlines, and the business is now mad at them, so they're mad at you, and then everybody goes home at the end of the day just frustrated. So we spend as much time as possible to automate our certificate issuance so that they don't have to think about it, right? They say what they want, and if it's within some common sense guidelines, it just automatically provisions. And if it's out, we send them in, we have an alert that says, oh, this is why you can't get the cert, so that they know that there's a reason.
Yep. Yeah, we went through an exercise and really identified, identified all of the operational work, and we kind of went through and we said, where's the big swags that we can take and really cut out operational work? And we cut our provisioning time from an embarrassing 5 days down to like 30 seconds. And you make those, and people think, oh, you're going to be out of a job, but the truth is, right, there's always something more to automate. There's always something new to innovate on. So it's not, it allows you, no one sits around saying, boy, I really wish I could click the approve button 500 times today. They get excited about, how am I going to go solve this new problem that no one's really thinking about, or that's coming in, I see on the horizon. That's what gets people excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually use some of the DigiCert tools to do discovery. And then once we identify all the certs, we try and classify them into the different lines of business that are actually issuing those certs. And then we identify the pipeline that they're actually running through. And then we try and insert ourselves into that pipeline and start to provide some automation capabilities to do the cert generation and renewal process.
I would add on the automation front, think carefully about how you're doing validation. So especially if you're a SaaS provider and you've got your customers' host names or certificates you're managing, customers will churn. You may be using a different validation method that worked at one point, well-known PKI validation directory. You may need to switch to email-based validation or some of the other methods. So the greater you can automate, the easier it is to do that. On the automation front too, you've seen Chrome, I think we'll talk about this in a little bit, but you've seen Chrome really getting aggressive in making these changes on the UI front to drive user perception to incentivize server operator behavior. So you need to be prepared from an automation perspective if there are changes that get pushed through cab, things like SHA-1 deprecation, or let's say RSA is broken, things like that you need to quickly do. So if you're automated, you're in a much better position to adapt to those evolving standards. Cert lifetime in particular. So you saw the 825-day ballot. I think that was ballot 193. Google had tried before with ballot 185 to push just over 13 months. They will come back. They will do it again. They will do it unilaterally if they have to. So you want to be ready for that.
Awesome.
And you should just build your automation for 3 days. If you want to future-proof your automation,
Right.
you should build your cert automation for 3 days rollover, and then whatever it ends up with, you'll be good. But I think that at the end of the day, 90 is just like where Google wants to get, and they're walking it down. And once they get to 90, they're just going to try to roll it all the way down to 3 days.
One of our actual goals in automating our F5 certificates was actually the ability to respond to 0-day type of announcements. And so one of the requirements, and when we were building some of the F5 automation, was that we could actually rotate every cert hosted on an F5 at Target within hours.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we tell our customers, especially ones that are building it into their onboarding process, we have to get a cert. We tell them, from the time you make an API call to the time we have a certificate in 120 plus POPs around the world, it's about a minute. So we try to really rely on DigiCert's backend and their API systems to process that volume at that speed. So it's been a critical part of our infrastructure.
Awesome. Now, this isn't, of course, meant to be a 55-minute long commercial for DigiCert. Okay, that's not our intentions here. It's to make. I meant it when I said we want this to be of value to you. And I want to back up in the conversation here a bit. There was something that was said there, and I want to make sure you don't miss it in the segue from the previous speaker onto this panel, and that is, how does your staff feel about the robots taking over? They are going to do my job. One thing that we've seen is we see IT and IS staff handling certificates and installing on servers, and yes, approve. And that's not what they went to school for. That's not what they built up all their experience for, and that's not really what they might be passionate about in their careers. A lot of the response that we get, and when we've been speaking about our automation tool that we brought over from Symantec, was some trepidation among the IT and IS folk of saying, wait a minute, I got people who are going to lose their jobs. So there's a consideration there. What is their job? Is it button pushing and tail chasing and responding to urgencies, or is it taking the 3 days to prevent those and then putting them onto things that they really want to work on, that they might be passionate about?
Well, I was talking to my chimney sweep and my milk delivery guy about this just yesterday, and I mean, everybody's job changes, right? Like, that's part of technology. I think that there was a study that said most technologists have to roll over their skill sets every 24 months to stay viable. So I understand you don't want to say, hey, we're going to automate you out of a job, but most people who aren't doing automated jobs have, like you said, have an engineer's title, and they don't want to do that. So if you do that, or if you're like us and you're moving to an agile environment where you now say, hey, we're in DevOps, so now developers get to build infrastructure, that's when you end up with Let's Encrypt certificates and Amazon certificates in there, because guess what? If those two are easier than your process of getting a DigiCert certificate built the way you want, they're going to download the cert bot, put it on Ubuntu, run it, and then be able to say, oh yeah, it's encrypted. I did this thing I saw when I Googled how to encrypt Apache.
We literally have three things, three things written on our whiteboard in our pod. So we're agile. We do Scrum pods. We have 3 things written on our whiteboard, and it is stability, customer experience, and speed and scale. And so, we have OKRs, we have our goals for the year and all that kind of stuff. But every time we put a job in Jira, a story in Jira, we kind of tie it back to those three things, because is this making our products more stable and available for customers, or internal customers? Are we providing the best experience to them, which is, are we providing something better than Let's Encrypt? Are we providing something better than what Joe developer is just going to go off and do on their own? And then the third thing, of course, is we're a big company. We have to be fast and we have to be able to scale.
Awesome. Now, if you notice, our panel started to get into standards and how are we going to respond to this, and Google wants that, and what have you. Especially coming from myself, coming from Symantec. 2017 has been an interesting year, especially in a forum like the CA Browser Forum. DigiCert and our team, especially Jeremy and others, have put a lot of effort into establishing and maintaining a productive relationship with the browsers, especially in the context of the CA Browser Forum. In 2017, obviously, we at Symantec felt the heat of that not going exactly the way we wanted, and it's good to come into this organization where that healthy relationship is already there. But from the customer standpoint, that's I'm talking about CA and browsers, and that's part of the CAB forum. Although when I hear like Dean Coughlin talk about that, they're very welcoming of organizations that are neither CA or a browser to come in and participate. So from the panel standpoint, are there particular standards that you guys would like to see focused on or prioritized at the CA Browser Forum?
Yeah, I mean, I would add one. Short-lived certs for us are very important, and I think there's some unclear guidance around, people know revocation doesn't work. Adam Langley's written about it quite a few times. Google with 60% market share doesn't check revocation. So, short-lived certs are the way to do this, and in particular, very short-lived certs. So there's challenges, of course. There's a lot of research around clock skew. I think there's concerns around the scale in which going into CT will be affected, but any sort of contributions that DigiCert can make there with respect to getting the browsers kind of moving along on short-lived certs. The other thing I would add is, we don't feel at Cloudflare that it's the place of the CAB forum, or CAs in particular, to make judgments on which sites do and do not deserve encryption. I think Steve from PayPal and the group here will disagree with me, but every site that's requested, we really want to reduce the friction and the operations that CAs have to do, and I think a lot of them feel that there are certain things they have to do, otherwise the browsers are going to come smite them for not doing these things. But that's a point-in-time issuance. The browsers are much better equipped to deal with things. Google's Safe Browsing List and Mozilla has something comparable. But that's a better place to deal with these sites that may put malicious content on after the fact, rather than holding up a certificate issuance, in particular as Chrome moves to prominently label not secure for those sites.
So I know we're, did you?
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I know we're interested in CAA records. So I'm really interested in the RFC that Tim has drafted. I mentioned before that the Joe developer or whatever wants to go really fast and maybe go to Let's Encrypt or something. And CAA would be a way for us to help block that. It may just be that he's not aware of our APIs that we have internal to consume our services, and so we can provide something as fast as Let's Encrypt, but we can also provide all these additional things because we're backed by Digi, we're backed by our own internal PKI. We can wrap additional things around there that Let's Encrypt can't offer an enterprise.
Yeah, I'll ask you to do the same thing that we're asked to do by our consumer team, and it's think of the consumer when you're at these things and vote for them. I talked to the Netflix people. They have embedded certificates in set-top boxes, and you don't want to break those. Figure out how old the average computer is, and make sure that while the CAB forum is important, if you're running to the bleeding edge, you're going to end up hurting people who need it the most, and that's that middle 40 to 60% who need to be protected, and look for you and look for us to deliver their data safely. At the end of the day, if the cab gets too far ahead of technology and implements stuff that then makes companies do insecure workarounds to provide the data, then at the end of the day, they're not helping anybody. You know, they've got their stuff voted on and they've moved on, but they've hurt consumers, and I think we've seen that a couple of times.
There's definitely a sense of balance and of perspectives that we want. You know, we want to be advancing at the same time that no customer, no consumer gets left behind. Heard loud and clear. That actually leads right into the next thing. We started getting there with the questions and the answers so far, and that is, it's two sides of the same coin. For you as our customers, what are the ways that we at DigiCert can represent you better in the CAB forum? Not just the topics, but what are the ways that we could do that? And the flip side of that is, how can we keep you informed as to what's going on? What would be the way you'd want to hear about what kinds of things?
I think CAA is a good example there. You know, we used to be an interested party in CAB, and I think our legal team let the IPR lapse, so we're getting back there. But just thinking about what are the practical implications of these new protocols that you know, the CAs must follow this, but how is that actually going to affect their customers? So I'll give you an example of CAA. The way it was originally written and codified and approved, you were supposed to check if there were a CNAME, you were supposed to then follow that destination all the way up and figure out, does that CNAME target have a CAA policy which would block issuance for a totally unrelated domain name? So we had a case where we had roughly 500,000 customers had CNAMEs to ghs.google.com. I think that's their blogger CNAME. So we were, as soon as this went into effect, we were no longer able to issue certs because of Google's CAA record, right? So those types of things involving customers and getting feedback. You know, not everyone is sitting there reading the public mailing list. So kind of contacting customers and bringing them into those conversations and saying, how is this going to affect you? They're being fixed. I know there's some errata working its way through, but doing that earlier would have saved a lot of pain.
Now, of note to the panel, but also obviously to the audience, also in the audience are salespeople and support people and authentication people, and make sure that as you go through and you're commenting on this, you know, how can we keep you up to speed? How can we represent you? There are other people who have roles in communicating to you and you through them also.
This is exactly one area that we can actually use automation, right? So like, I'm just kind of thinking outside the box here, but it would be great if we could actually, you know, sign up through a Slack DigiCert channel, right, where you're constantly getting like some questions. You don't get like a full survey where you have to kind of spend like 5-10 minutes. It's just like once in a while, just send a couple messages to your customers and say, what would you like to see from the CA browser form, right? And then just quick yes or no answer on Slack, push it out on the back end. You guys just run the numbers, and then you can get a pretty good idea of where everybody,
Right, that's fantastic. And then also I would imagine that the feedback loop goes the other way.
Right.
You could use that channel for quick notifications.
Absolutely.
And an enterprise level blog. I love DigiCert's blog, but it's a consumer facing blog. Its priority is here's for consumers. You go to dig into the blog, and like you said, you have amazingly smart people here, and there's not a lot of like, hey, here's what's happening at the CAB forum, here's why. And maybe that isn't a general audience blog, but spun off into that level would be nice. Sure. I get the Feisty Duck email once a month, and it's chock full of TLS information that's great to read, and like that level of information from a DigiCert source would help move you guys to the forefront of like enterprise TLS.
And make it RSS, please.
Yeah.
Good. All right, thank you, I appreciate that. I do want to note that there's a news source besides this, and it's not specifically related to CAB Forum. Every month, my counterpart down in Cape Town, Angelique Pereira, and I host a monthly threat briefing, and it's free. It's available on our Bright Talk channel. It's on the last Thursday of every month. But what we cover is all the news that maybe you don't have time to keep up on going on outside of CAB Forum, but just generally, here are the things that you might want to get a recap on that's going on in the world that's going to affect you, things that you should know, but also may trigger things in your own world, in your own environment. So feel free to join. There's no cost to do so, with the exception of registering at Bright Talk. We do it every month, and it's very organized, very timely. It's a worthwhile hour of your time. Of course, if you can't catch it live, we do record it, but all the previous years are up there likewise. So last Thursday of the month, please join us for that. It's a good source of news. And it may also prompt getting feedback and you being able to say, hey, I see that this is coming, or this is a hot thing that we're not addressing. But you never know where a good idea comes from, and we would love to help serve you with that. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. It looks like we might actually be able to take some questions. So if you've got any questions that might be stirring up in your brains, get ready to tee them up. I know we do have open mics, and we might actually have time to do that. So the fourth and last area I wanted to talk about, and this John said something earlier that just, man, that was a great quote, and that was that an organization will reveal its values through its investments. Wow, yeah, that's the money talks, but also the effort talks too. And applying it to the city that we're in, you don't win in Las Vegas without believing in some very carefully placed bets. So we're going to go towards a future bent. We're going to go back to what's coming in next, especially for our panelists, but also in reflection of the previous speaker and what's on your mind here. Two questions. The first one is, which long-term industry trends for SSL and PKI are worth your attention in your organization?
I guess I'll start. I think the Google news on showing not secure in the browser starting in July has spurred a lot of inbound interest for us. I think that customers and prospects are very concerned with the UI changes they're making. So if you look back to 2014, they laid out a plan. The adoption rate at the time, percent of requests over HTTPS, was low 30s, 31, 32%. They laid out a very clear plan. Here's what's going to happen. Here's a straw man proposal for we're going to change this in the UI when it hits 65%, 75%, 85%. So I wrote about this on the Cloudflare blog last week, but we're coming up to this period where they've announced these changes in July. If you extrapolate out, we're about 70% right now requests over HTTPS. By July, it'll be 75. That's exactly what Chris Palmer wrote in his email to Blink Dev. If you take a step further, so you should obviously be prepared if you have any pages that aren't accessible over HTTPS, as well as your customers focus there. But the next step is even more severe, right? So they are potentially, if you believe what this original article said, they're going to remove the lock entirely, right? And they're just going to really have a jarring user behavior of not secure, and it's going to pop up if a page is loaded in that fashion. So that's one of the trends that we're really preparing for. Our customers are quite afraid of. It's causing them to act quickly. The other thing we're seeing is more interest in elliptic curve cryptography. So we issue, for customers, we issue 2 certificates. We'll do an RSA 2048 with a SHA-2 RSA signature, which we say we present to kind of legacy browsers. And then we'll do a elliptic curve certificate, a P256 key with a SHA-2 ECDSA signature. And we'll give that's all we give to our free customers. We're seeing more and more adoption of that, and browsers and operating systems are more and more able to support that. And from your perspective, it's much lower computational cost. I ran some benchmarks on our keyless product the other day. We can do roughly 11,000 signatures per second per core of elliptic curve signatures, and just a few hundred RSA. So I think that trend's going to continue. Adoption is going to continue, but you want to make sure that a lot of you may need to support legacy browsers. So you want to make sure you have ways at the edge to handle both of those cases and fall back where needed. Same thing along PCI changes with TLS versioning. So a lot of in June, I believe it's in end of June, you need to drop TLS 1.0 for anything that's kind of under PCI. I'm not a compliance person, so maybe off slightly here. But you take a look at, be able to measure what is that long tail of old traffic, right? TLS 1.1 is effectively non-existent. We see less than 0.5% at our edge. But have a plan to, okay, what are these user agents we're seeing? How can we communicate to to our customers or people interacting with us, and how can we phase this out as TLS 1.2 and 1.3 become more and more prevalent.
The ability to understand that TLS isn't just HTTPS is going to be a driving factor going forward as more and more people move to the cloud. They need TLS certificates for Kubernetes clusters, for database clusters, and you have to be able to provide them. So your support stack goes from, okay, here's how you do it in Apache, Nginx, and Tomcat. All right, I have 3 READMEs. Now you need 300 READMEs because I need MySQL to talk to an Apache server that's talking to a Lambda function. Oh yeah, and it's across the internet. So you have to do that because one of those, if you don't have that built right, one of those TLS links will build down. And I think more and more companies, as Gerardo said, are going to zero trust, which means traffic is encrypted in transit everywhere. And it needs to be encrypted with a valid certificate because self-signed certificates are starting to be rejected in Ubuntu and in CentOS.
You brought up Kubernetes, and that's kind of a hot button right now for us. And I don't know how familiar people are with Kubernetes, but there's definite challenges with certificates inside of pods in Kubernetes, and how do you make those certs unique across, if you've got Kubernetes clusters spread across multiple regions and multiple pods, how do you have unique namespaces for those certs that you can differentiate between I created a cert over here in this pod doing this function versus over here in this other pod doing a completely different function, but by default the namespace is the same. So there's some definite challenges there, and figuring out how to do that's going to be an interesting thing in 2018.
And Jerry brought up the zero trust model, right? So you actually go from maybe having no certificates on your laptops to having potentially 3, right? 1 for your device trust, 1 for your identity as an individual trust, and then some for code signing as well, right? So managing the lifecycle of all those certificates in automated fashion is going to be key.
Yeah, and especially on the client side, we work with a lot of IoT companies, and they're producing these devices that have certain capabilities, and they want to embed client certificates in them. Managing that lifecycle and that key management is obviously a much bigger challenge. So people are wrestling with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I actually used to work for GE on the digital side, and their IoT devices, they're embedding certificates as part of the supply chain, but embedding them in is one thing, right? But managing the life cycle of those is going to be another thing. Absolutely. And these things are going to be, inside your hospitals, inside your bodies, right? It's going to be on your airplanes, right? Controlling potentially the speed that you're actually traveling at. So it's going to be pretty scary if the individuals implementing the solution don't have that forefront thinking and build the life cycle management into it.
I had mentioned when I teed this up, you have to believe when you're gambling here in some very carefully placed bets, but you don't place bets unless you're going to make some money on those bets. So the second part of the question here, and this is where we're going to wrap up, is there guidance that you would give to get the most value from your investment in PKI and SSL certificates and tools? How do you get that maximum return on investment in what you're putting into things?
So I live by, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So spend some time up front reading. I know it's kind of like bedtime reading material, but read through the RFCs. Look at all the settings that you should be enabling to enhance your PKI infrastructure. And don't be afraid, jump in, roll up your sleeves and start going at it.
It has to be frictionless. Your security should be top notch, but it should also be something that your developers don't think about, right? You should give them the tools and the tooling that their defaults are secure. And if they're built that way, they're not gonna deviate from them. And when you give them a long list of, here, you have to do these 30 manual steps, they're going to skip them because they're being asked to move by the business faster than they can.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jerry. We try to make it easy for our developers internally to securely generate key material. So, DigiCert has a great tool on the website. I use it all the time because I can never remember OpenSSL commands. But, here's a utility to generate a key and a CSR. You don't want your developers Googling that and looking that up because likely they're not going to do it in a secure fashion. The key is going to be somewhere on their laptop. You will get asked at some point by a customer, how do you manage your key material? This comes up a lot with us. So have a good policy there, make it almost impossible for your developers to do something wrong and provide strong, reasonable defaults, as Jerry said.
Yeah. I'm not sure I have too much to add to any of that. I mean, it's a lot of planning, creating an easy button for security. I mean, you want to make the right path the least resistance path too. So thinking through that, putting yourself in your customer's shoes and providing the best service you can.
Awesome. Okay, before we give our audience here an opportunity to ask any questions, there's something on your mind as we've been going through these points where you say, oh, I should have said that. I wanted to mention this. This is your chance to throw in anything else into the kitchen sink. Anybody?
So I would say that be looking at your code pipelines. There's a lot of things there. I know code signing. We're looking to pull code signing in as a service versus having individual management of code signing certs, because code signing certs are powerful, as you can tell by how much they cost on the dark web. But yeah, so that's one thing to look at is understanding and protecting your code as it comes out of your build environment and eventually comes down to some run state. How do you know that nothing has been injected in between? And how can you prove that? And also, how do you protect the key material that is doing the code signing, right? So, having key material on some official laptop someplace is not an answer. I want that code signing private key to be sitting in an HSM that's got access control, that's got separation of duty, that meets all of the same controls that we put around HSMs that hold the keys to our CAs or vaults or whatever.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the whole DevSecOps model, right? Is really kind of building in security into your pipeline, right? Through plugins and Jenkins, and as part of your build process, pulling in key material and pushing it out into the actual devices, right? And to Jerry's point is make it frictionless, right? So maybe not implement protective controls, but move more towards detective controls with rapid response processes behind that. So you let them kind of build it out, and then you use DigiCert's tool to discover that they've been using Let's Encrypt, and then you follow up by maybe talking to their team and saying, well, why are you not using the enterprise solution that we're providing for you, right? Why are you going out and seeking this alternative solution?
We didn't talk a whole lot about certificate transparency, and I think that's something that you should be ready for, especially as you think about every time you're issuing a certificate through DigiCert that's getting logged. Redaction didn't really pass muster, so have a strategy in place come April. At least that's what the current timeline is. Tim and I have a bet. I think it's going to be pushed, but come April, browsers are going to start taking action, potentially showing interstitials, whatever it may be, if certs aren't in CT. So have a policy if you need to do your own sort of redaction. If you don't want to put it in CT, know that's coming, especially if it's not for browsers. But then also have those endpoints set up with secure defaults. So Jerry shared some stuff on S3 buckets. You may have seen that in the news as well. People are monitoring CT, looking for issuance of your domain and saying, here's a new endpoint. Let me go see what I can find there. Yep. So keep that top of mind, as well as have some CT monitoring in place so you can keep track of your own infrastructure, who is issuing in your name, and where are those certificates and key material going.
Excellent. Okay, so that wraps up the kitchen sink. What's the bet in roulette where you place one bet, you pretty much bet on everything on the board. So we're done with that. We're going to move into questions from the audience. So if you have questions that you'd love to ask of our panel, this is now your chance, and you teed up for a question right there.
Yes.
Please feel free. And if you would, introduce yourself before you ask.
Hi, I'm Dave Cooper with Wells Fargo. I was wondering if there's any strategic thought or vision surrounding the crypto system migration to quantum resilient cryptography. That's one part. The other is if there's any thoughts or any activity going on related to DLT and blockchain-based CAs and being able to establish trust of the different identities being used within blockchain.
So I know the whole NIST stance on ECC was really hot, like, I don't know, 6 months, year ago, when NIST came out and said, oh, maybe ECC isn't the post-quantum crypto we thought it was. So that's interesting, and it's also interesting that that chatter has kind of died down. But I know I'm following the post-quantum crypto, not forum, but there's a group, post-quantum crypto, and they meet about, I think, yearly. So I know I'm just kind of following that. I don't have any great insight, but.
Yeah, we have a cryptography team that is doing a lot of experiments around this now, and we've got people doing research trying to figure out what are these strategies that can be employed. We're working with Mozilla, I believe, on some of these experiments, so I don't know if we've talked about them publicly yet, but that's something we're focused on, and one, being ready if we need to make some sort of move, being able to do it as fast as possible. But two, I know we're actually looking at I don't understand the math behind it, so I can put you in touch with someone that does.
Yeah, for us, it's really in the R&D section. So we're kind of looking at the different use cases that we can use, like blockchain, potentially. The quantum stuff is definitely interesting. We're starting to dabble a little bit into that just to see what the practical implementations and the management and support would be with it. But yeah, it's still very early stages.
Thank you.
Excellent. Now, just to keep everybody on, we got to watch the clock here. We have, according to our confidence monitor, or whatever we call it down here, we have 8 minutes and 57 seconds left. And obviously, 3 people already teed up for questions, so we'll move things along. If you'd introduce yourself and then pose your question.
Andy Pekarsky with Zebra Technologies. You mentioned P256 for the curve, for elliptical curve. Is that pretty much the primary one that people are using, or are there other curves that is being used more?
Yeah, I mean, by default, we're using P256. We do issue for our keyless product, especially when we're doing mutual TLS, something we think is going to be out there for a long time. We're using P384, but vast majority of what we're doing is P256.
Hi, I'm Raju Datar from ADP. Can you tell us about some of the practical problems that came up during automation and how you solved it? For example, you mentioned about load balancers doing the job, but if you take load balancers and you want to automate the certificate process, you can generate the keys, you can generate the CSR, you can get your certificates, but now when you want to do SSL profiles to update it, that's where the problem will come in, because you want to keep the profile back in case you want to revert or roll back. But you cannot delete this old search back now because you have got a profile up there. So some of the practical challenges that came up during automation, especially with the load balancers.
Yeah, so we have the securest key management system in the world. We delete the keys after we install them, so we don't keep them. So we're using AWS, so we upload the stuff to build the ELBs. And if they need to be rebuilt, we rerun Terraform. We're automated all on the back end. So I'm not running automation on our TLS certs alone. Everything in our clouds have to be automated. And we're trying to get to the point where we're rebuilding everything in our clouds every 30 days anyway. So it's delete and rebuild. So we work really, really hard to make sure that if we need to change a profile, you go into your Terraform script, you change your profile, you plan it, and then you push it to our dev environment and see if it works, and then push it to prod. So it's really, our infrastructure is immutable now. It's not stuff, right? So we try not to keep anything around longer than 30 days.
So you never had issues about rollback because of certificate trust issues and having certificate hierarchy issues changing because of the certificate changing from Symantec to DigiCert?
No, I haven't. I haven't ran into that personally.
Well, so we use a management tool that has an F5 integration, and it supports rollback. But I would say, as far as challenges, you know, kind of a lot of times it's very security driven. Like, you should go do this. Bring those guys along with you. I mean, there's so many wins for the teams that partner with you. It's all about collaboration. It's really change it from security dictating to we can have this fantastic story to tell the enterprise together at the end of the day, and you get a way different interaction.
Yeah, so I'm on the same boat that Jerry's on, right? It's really building in that blue-green patching, right? Have these two systems kind of running in parallel next to each other. Do all your testing and validation, make sure that nothing breaks, and then just flip the switch and then kill the other one.
Yeah, and on the trust chain part of it, what we found to be really helpful is when we take a certificate and we package it up and put it at the edge, ignoring kind of the two signatures for a moment, we have a process that's repeatable that will take that leaf certificate and automatically build that trust chain so that if we do need to pull one out, we can rerun that process and it'll see, okay, this is no longer the path that we're going to build, because we'll basically stack it with the intermediate and serve it at the edge. So having that process automated has been helpful for us. The other thing is separating the configuration from the certificate. So we'll do what we call lazy loading at the edge, where we'll see the SNI incoming, figure out, okay, which particular certificate we're serving, use that for TLS termination, and then we'll have a separate kind of decoupled configuration for what is the minimum TLS version, which Cypher suites are supported, things like that. So keeping certificates and config separate has been really helpful for us.
Yeah, we do that similarly. So various cloud providers have vaults or whatever you drop certs in. So the cert management is almost separate, and then it's a matter of just pointing back to the certificate for whatever resource that needs to consume it.
I'm Mike Olson with Boeing Employees Credit Union. I have a question for you around the DevSecOps cycle. So specifically with regards to renewal automation. So as DevSecOps moves forward, for example, and they change their builds and they change this, that, and the other thing, they change configs and so forth, the automation that you might build for automatically renewing the certificates, for example, if they are putting a certificate in a binding or in a web service call or in a JSON, or if they're putting any kind of that stuff in the, it changing where the certificate lives in their application, how are you keeping up with that, that change? Are you just part of their cycle? Do you just, I'm curious how you do that, because, you know, we have requirements to be up 99.99% of the time, right? So how do you do that? How do you make sure that your renewal automation doesn't break or actually works as intended, keeping up with their DevSecOps?
When you rebuild every 30 days, you'd never hit a renewal date. So that's how we're doing it, is we never want to have to renew a certificate ever in the cloud. Sorry, Jeremy, for the load we put on your infrastructure, but I personally think certificate renewal is a concept of the past, right?
So we do have some long-lived things, and we make that management of the credentials that are required to request certs the responsibility of the app team. So we provide basically a portal for them so they can basically reference a vault location or a secrets management location where they keep their creds updated for any cert-related calls that they need to make. So then, really, all that may potentially change is that cred.
Yeah, so I'll clarify why I'm asking. So DigiCert, Symantec, they offer specific automation tools along these lines. And so while your approaches work for larger organizations that I've worked for in the past, they don't work for the small credit union. So, and there's also a cost factor to that too. I mean, keeping up with the billing on audit, and I am curious, honestly, about your approach. I mean, how do you bill and get your credits back if you're reissuing, issuing, revoking, so on and so forth? Like, how does your billing work out for that? But
Spencer Fry just texted me. He's willing to talk to you after the meeting.
okay,
Everything's free. Yeah.
One
yeah.
thing
But I was really curious about the automation tools that they offer, and because they do offer that automatic renewal. So I was curious
And
Aside from building fresh, which is great.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic idea, but.
Yeah, we don't use any tool. I mean, we keep our certificates in Salt, so we have, you know, some configuration management tool, and we'll constantly scan for that and see something needs to be replaced. If it is replaced, it gets merged into a staging branch that automatically gets spun up for, you know, canary releases. But we don't, you know, I think we do in some cases use the auto renewal, but those are pushed to us via email. I think it would be great to get a webhook or something where we could act on that.
I think that's a good idea, actually, as you're actually going through the commit stages looking for those certs. Okay, all right, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so looking at our monitor here, we're counting down from 40 seconds to go, and I am dedicated to being on time here. So we're going to wrap up questions from me to these guys, and as well as you, of course, to them. But we're all in this together, and you know, clearly we can see that from the sharing of expertise of our panel of experts, but also by the questions that you ask. So, in wrapping up the panel and moving on to the next thing, I'm going to ask for a round of applause, not only for them, but also for you for sticking with us.